Hi there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel for another video. Today we are very behind. I had this kit done for well over a month. We moved, so I never got to edit these, but this is the Simon Says Stamp May Brushed Flowers kit. I'll show you what came in the kit. I will have things linked separately, but this kit itself is sold out. But let's talk about what came in this kit. You're going to get a little piece of candy as usual. You're going to get a small teal blending brush. This is a Simon Says Stamp one. You're also going to get some fine detail clear embossing powder. You'll get some Pawsitively saturated ink. That was the CITRINE, Ocean Rose, and Lucky. And then you're going to get this flannel ink cube holder with the zipper pouch. And I was super excited about this because I actually really love it. It's fabulous for those little mini ink cubes and keeps them in place. You're going to get a metallic doll pink envelope. You'll have the $5 off coupon code. This one's expired, but I have other ones. You'll get 6 sheets of 6x6 Prima Marketing painted floral cardstock, and they're all absolutely beautiful. Then you get the 6x8 brushed flowers stamp set. I absolutely love this. It's beautiful with all the inks that came in this kit, and just think of the possibilities with this one. It's a lot of fun. You get your idea sheet, and then you get 110-pound solar white cardstock, and then some Simon Says Stamp black and doll pink. For card number 1, we're actually going to make 2 cards, and they are going to be a couple of 4-bar cards. So 4-bar cards measure 3.5 inches by 5 inches when they're all closed up. So I'm cutting down some of that pattern paper. This stuff is just beautiful. So I've cut those to 3 inches by 6 inches, and now I'm going to trim those down to be 3 inches by 4.5 inches because I want those to fit with about, I don't know, 1/4 inch border around each side. And so in doing this, I will have that. So I'm just going to cut both of those down. And then my next step will be to do some stamping. So I'm going to pull out all of the different inks. We've got Citrine, Ocean, Lucky, and Rose, and we're going to stamp various flowers. And we're going to do that with all those colors. They're so saturated and vibrant. I love this color palette. So pretty. And so we'll do that with our leaves. We'll get a couple different kinds of leaves in there. And later on, I have to go back and stamp out all these images again, but this way I have a couple of 4-bar cards, and I love to have these on hand. These are just so great when you don't have a ton to say, but you want to send like a little thank you or a little something. And then once I have an idea of how I want those arranged, I'll pull out my liquid glue after I have fussy cut them all out. And I know some of you hate, well, a lot of you hate fussy cutting, so I imagine that Simon Says Stamp has the matching die to go along with this, so I'll have that linked down below if this stamp set is still available. I imagine it is, but you know, I haven't actually looked yet. So there we go. And I'm going to focus this whole little swag of flowers down to that lower left-hand side. And I'm okay with these sticking off the side because we are going to have a bigger border, a bigger white border. And these actually may be a little bit smaller than 4-bar if I remember correctly when I trimmed these down. I can't remember the exact size, but I would just say 4-bar, that's what I was going for. And then off camera, I did stamp out a couple of sentiments. So 7 inches by 5 inches is what this would measure, and then you would score it at 3.5 inches. And then I'll just tack this down to the front of our 4-bar card base using that same liquid glue. And like I said, I stamped out a couple of thank you sentiments, and we will attach trimmed it down, and we'll attach that to the front using that same liquid glue. And then we'll assemble our other card the exact same way, and that will finish off card number 1 for you. I love how that turned out. For card number 2, we're going to combine some of those gorgeous pattern papers. I love it when some of the 6x6 have these cute little cards that you could stack up and make into something more, kind of build up a background. I just love that. So I have a couple of them cut out there, and I'm just playing with placement, but I loved this pattern paper so much. And then I'm going to bring in a few of the stamps. A few of the flower tops. I want to try something using some new to me blending brushes, and I assume you could do this with any blending brushes that you might have, but these ones are new to me. I like how they have caps and they're colored, and they even have a little stand, and Miles is doing quality control, as you can see, and I think he's okay with everything, so he's going to go check out what his brother is doing. But So I'm going to bring in the yellow one because we're going to use the citrine. And what I'm going to do is focus on, I just want to see if I can blend onto the stamp. And you can, you absolutely can. So we'll bring in that really cool flannel ink cube holder. I'm going to use that citrine color and just focus on the centers of these flowers. That one I went a little heavy-handed and went too far. So I'm going to try and wipe away some of that. But I'm going to stamp that down onto my cardstock. And I love that. I think it looks so cool. And then I bring in the rose, and I try to do the same thing with it and another blender brush. But these ink pads are super saturated. If I had the room, I would buy all of the colors. And then I just blend this on the edges. I gotta be honest though, I like the look. I think it's kind of fun. It's a very light pink look that I'm getting when I stamp it down, but it wasn't necessarily the look I was going for. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pick up the ink pad, and I'm going to do what I sort of do normally, which would be like a rock and roll technique, and I'm focusing just on the edges. I'll bring in my microfiber cloth and just pounce in the centers to make sure that those aren't there, and then I'll stamp that down, and I love how that looks. Oh, I love how that looks. So as I said earlier, this is an A2 size card, so a 5.5 inch by 8.5 inch piece of cardstock scored at 4 1/4, and then we'll start gluing down what, the placement of what I wanted. And this little piece right there has a sentiment on it that's very nice. So I'm not adding another sentiment to it. As you can see, I stamped out the stems. I went ahead and fussy cut everything out, and now we're just gluing things down. But yeah, if you hate fussy cutting, you definitely want to consider getting that matching die. And it's funny, I had this one done at my previous place. We moved, and we've lived in this house now for a little over a month. And I'm finally now getting this video edited. Wanted this done, before we even moved, but ran out of time. All right, using foam tape on the back of our flowers. And then I'm going to attach this down to that card base, and I'm going to leave a little bit of a white border on that left-hand side. I love doing that sometimes. It's super fun. And then I have that leftover flower, so just going to go ahead and stick that on the inside. I like doing that anyway. I just think it's fun to bring the outside into the inside and make everything nice and cohesive. But that's going to finish off our second card for today, and I love how that one turned out too. For card number 3, we're going to just take this one stamp and try to do a little bit of rainbow-ish stamping. But for the first stamp, I am stamping it in VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. It's that Just a Note to Say Hello. I have found that this VersaFine Clair just stamps so crisply. It's just beautiful. And then I'll clean off my stamp in between each time. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to line this up. I'm basically going 3 squares up on my little misty sheet back there. So I keep it at 3 squares up, and then just try and line those up on top of the other lines. And I'm okay that it's going to go outside of the misty a little bit. It'll be fine. I'll start with that first color, rose, and we'll ink that up and stamp it with rose. But I want these to all be kind of in a line. It's actually a very simple concept. It just takes a little bit of planning and time, which is okay with me. I'm okay with that. So we're just using those squares on that misty paper that I have back there, and then we'll go with our blue color, which is Ocean, and then we'll stamp it in Lucky after we move the paper again. And I'm gonna try, like I said, it's rainbow-ish. It doesn't really end up being that way because I didn't account for the black one, but it's all good. So sticking our magnets down, it's okay that it's sticking out. I'll stamp that down, and then I'm going to need to move it up, and we'll start stamping the bottom line, but we're staying on that line that I'm kind of on that goes vertical, and then we'll try and measure the, keep it on that same horizontal line as well. And then we're going to bring in our citrine, and we'll stamp from there, and then we'll just finish up the whole thing going through the same process of using that grid paper on the back, and that's what we end up having. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this down just a tiny bit because I want there to be a black border paper behind it. So I'm just going to trim this down. This will be the full front of an A2 size card, so that's 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And then I decide I want to bring in a couple of the hearts that came in this stamp set. I like that there's some different sized hearts. And I'm going to stamp those using the rose color. And you saw me cut it. That's only because that heart was attached. I think it was a manufacturer issue, just attached to one of the sentiments, which was fine. It didn't end up hurting either stamp. And then we'll stamp the other one. Or there's another smaller one. A little chubby one. He's cute. And that's going to be it for the front of that card. So I'll glue this down to my black panel. And then, like I said, this is for an A2 size card, so I'm going to attach this to the front of the A2. And that's all I'm going to do. You could add extra embellishment to it if you really wanted to, like maybe bring in some glossy accents or whatnot, but I like how simple this one is. And that'll finish off card number 3. Moving on to card number 4, we're going to do some ink blending with these inks using that very cool ink cube holder and those blender brushes that I have. And I think that they blend really nicely. Now this cardstock that I'm using is just the cardstock that came in the kit. So it's not necessarily a cardstock that I would say is great for ink blending. It works fine, you know, in a pinch. But I didn't have like a bunch of ink blended marks, which is nice. And I get the impression that these inks will blend really well together. I do like how they overlap and how you can create new colors. I think that's a really cool thing. And oftentimes I don't really ever love my ink blending anyway, and that's where splatter and, you know, water spots and stuff come in super handy because they cover a multitude of mistakes. But, you know, so I'm looking at what I've blended and I don't love it, but I think these blend nicely. So I did the rose, the citrine, and then I'll move on to the lucky. And we'll blend over the top of our citrine and then make sure that we have plenty to overlap with our ocean as well. We obviously are doing a rainbow here. And then we'll just go back into our citrine and bring that color down and over. Like I said, don't love how it's blended. I mean, they blend great. I just don't love how these have blended on this cardstock. I think that's probably the issue that I'm having. And not the brushes, and definitely not the inks. So now we'll come in with our ocean ink and we'll blend that last one. It's such a pretty color. Probably one of my favorite blues because it's more of a teal blue. Super pretty. All right. And then we'll come back in with our lucky color as well. And then when I'm happy with, or as happy as I'm going to get blending that, I'm going to clean up my mess, and then we're going to bring in some splatter because I kind of have to. We're going to do little spritzes of water, and I'm just using my Distress ink sprayer. And obviously this paper isn't watercolor paper, but these inks react very quickly, very nicely to the water. So I'll heat set that to make sure everything is nice and dry before I move on to doing any stamping, which I want to do some overlap stamping. So I'm using each of those colors. We've got our rose. We're going to stamp over the top of rose, and we'll do the same thing with our lucky, and they are going to kind of overlap into the other colors, which is neat because it makes those new colors. We'll do the same thing with the citrine, and they go over the top to create orange and like a yellow green. And same thing with our ocean. And then when I'm happy with what I've stamped, I'm going to stamp using some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, the You're the Best. And I'll bring in one of these other little extras and I'll stamp that all over the background. Love how those little pops of black really do help those colors pop even more and seem even more vibrant. And then I'm going to attach this down to my card base. So I had cut this down to 4 inches by 5.5 inches, and I'll have a little bit of that pink cardstock showing on the left and right hand side. You could leave it as is, and I like it, but I don't love it. So I am going to bring in some Pear Blossom Press sentiment stock, and I'm going to ink up that sentiment again with some Juicy embossing ink after I've used an anti-static powder tool. And then we'll stamp that down on top and cover that with our Simon Says Stamp Detail White embossing powder. And then we'll heat set that till that is smooth and melted. And then we'll just stick that over the top using a couple of foam squares. So like I said, you could leave it as is or step it up a little notch here. Maybe even add some gems to that background. How cool would that be? But I'm much happier with that. And I did stamp a sentiment on the inside as well. And that'll finish off card number 4. For our 5th and final card today, we're going to make a square card. It's going to end up being 5 inches by well, 5 by 5, so that's a square. So I'm cutting down my pattern paper. I just loved this pattern paper. I say that about every one of the pieces in here because they're just all absolutely gorgeous. So this is cut down to a little bit smaller than that. It's like 4 3/4 by 4 3/4. And then I'm going to cut down a black panel to be 5 inches by 5 inches. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then my card base will be 5 by 10 inches of white cardstock, and then just score it at 5 inches. And that way you can easily write to your recipient on the inside. And our next step then will be to stamp out our images. And it looks like actually I cut my pattern paper to be a little bit smaller than that. So I think I must have cut it to be just slightly smaller than 5 inches for my pattern paper. And then I'll stamp out all of my leaves using that ocean color. And then I am going to ink blend some of our rows on the edges of our citrine. I just loved the way that looked, and I thought it softened those edges very, very nicely. Otherwise, it was just a little too stark white for me. And then for the leaves, I'll do that with our ocean color. I'll just blend on some of the ocean, and I just do it very subtly so that it doesn't cover up the leaves, but it does soften the edges of that white cardstock, which is great. All right, and then we're going to just start assembling our card. I'm going to build a little swag there in the center, a little bit higher than the center, but centered nonetheless. And then we'll build our pieces around it just using our liquid glue. You could step it up by adding foam squares. That would really give this card some dimension. But I'm going to go ahead and keep this flat as an easy mailer. And since it's a 5-inch card, you could put it in a 5 by 7 envelope, and then you wouldn't have to pay extra postage, because usually when you send something in a square envelope, you have to pay extra postage, at least here in the US. And then I'll glue this one down. And then our sentiment, we're going to go ahead and stamp that onto that black cardstock, or some black cardstock, and heat emboss that. And then we're going to give it a fishtail banner end. So we'll cut into the center and then cut into that part from each side. It isn't perfect or flawless, but it does, I guess perfect and flawless are the same, aren't they? And then we'll glue that down, and then we can attach this down to our black piece of cardstock. And then we can attach that down to our card base. I'm running out of glue there. And then once we get that attached, that's going to fit that full front of that 5 by 5 square. That's going to finish off card number 5. So we got quite a variation in there for you. Let's go ahead and take a look at all the cards that I made for you. I would love to know which one was your favorite, if you did in fact have a favorite. And if you have this kit, have you delved into it yet? That would be interesting to me as well. But yeah. So thanks for stopping by. Thanks for giving me a like, and for subscribing if you haven't already done so. And as always, I'll see you very soon in another video. Bye, everybody.